Hello, cloud people. I just passed the CKAD exam. Why did I take it? How did I prepare for it? What was the exam like? And what are my top tips for taking the CKAD? My name is Yann Stoneman, and I'm a solutions architect. If you want more videos and content on tech certifications, AWS how-to videos, please like and subscribe and follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. While I do mostly make content on AWS, the content and opinions in these videos are my own and do not reflect the views of AWS. Why did I take the exam? If you're not constantly learning in the tech field, you're gonna become outdated soon. And for me, certification exams help me stay focused. With technology, it's so easy to go into so many rabbit holes that having a set curriculum with an exam helps me stay on track in a single direction. And why Kubernetes? Well, last time I checked, there were 93,000 plus open jobs in the US with Kubernetes in their name, including at top companies like Amazon, Twitter, TikTok, and so forth. And so many companies I hear of are using it. Another reason is to get experience without having experience. I was never put on a Docker project in the past until I had the Docker certification. Once I had the Docker certification, all of a sudden my colleagues started asking me Docker questions and I got more involved in Docker related projects. So I hope this will have the same effect. Now that I have the CKAD exam under my belt, I will have more confidence to answer questions related to Kubernetes, and I hope it will also attract Kubernetes type projects so that I have that experience under my belt for real. And finally, the fourth reason I took this exam was to give me a deadline for learning certain content. The way this exam works is you buy a voucher and then you have 1 year in which to use that voucher, including one free retake exam within that 1 year. So I bought that exam voucher without even being prepared. That way I had the incentive of $300 potentially getting wasted if I didn't learn the material by the end of that 1 year. And that worked. That definitely gave me the motivation needed. I heard in psychology that people are more afraid of loss than of gain. So by having the potential loss of $300, that definitely gave me motivation. Now, how did I prepare? Okay, I am not sponsored by a cloud guru. I just happened to get that as a benefit from my employer. So, hey, I use whatever free resources I can get. They were free to me. And a cloud guru does have a course specifically tailored to the CKAD certification. I actually skipped the lectures. I just went through the actual hands-on labs and the practice exams at the end. And I found that the hardness, the difficulty level of those exercises and practice exams were even slightly more difficult than the actual exam. So I thought it was great preparation. Why did I skip the lectures in that course? Well, because I had already listened to a bunch of lectures in the Kubernetes deep dive course on A Cloud Guru. How do I fit in listening to all these lectures while having a full-time job and being a new dad? I listened to lectures while shoveling snow, while gardening, while doing the dishes. That's the beauty about lectures. You can listen to them like a podcast or an audiobook. And the third resource I used to prepare was Pod Control, a play on words with Cube Control, but Pod Control, so Pod CTL. What was particularly helpful about that podcast were the episodes where they just went in depth explaining a certain concept, such as networking or Helm or other Kubernetes concepts like that. And it was also good to get a flavor for what the Kubernetes community was like and how the development of that open source project has been progressing. So that's why and how. Now, what about the exam? It's $300, but I hear sometimes they give discounts at the Linux Foundation. I heard around Thanksgiving especially. Now, you gotta do a cost-benefit comparison here. If you're gonna get a promotion or a higher paying job, is it worth waiting a whole year until a discount comes around? I'm not so sure. But if it's almost around the time of Thanksgiving in the US, might as well wait a little bit and see if they do come out with a discount again. The passing score seems to be 60%, In the info they have on the exam, they say they'll get back to you in 24 hours with the exam results. But once I was done with the exam, they actually said on the screen, "We'll be done getting back to you within 24 hours. And that was true. They did get back to me within 24 hours, which was great. This exam is hands-on and open book, meaning you're actually in a terminal environment using the Vim editor and so forth to actually make stuff happen with Kubernetes. No multiple choice. And open book means you get to have a browser window open where you access resources in a certain domain and subdomain. I'll have a lot more about how to make the most of that in my exam experience and my demo later on in this video. And I also have a link below that includes the most up-to-date list of domains that are allowed to be used during the exam. The thing I won't cover about the exam is the actual content, because you can find that well documented in the actual exam guide and any course about this exam. And now my exam tips. Use the alias instead of typing out kube control. And there's no need to create that alias. The exam environment comes with the alias. So instead of kube control get pods, you can just write out get pods. In an exam where there's a lot of typing, you definitely want to save time anywhere you can. Second, use copy paste for everything. For each question, when they ask you to create a pod with a certain name or a certain number of replicas and so forth, any of these variables like name or numbers, they make it easy to just click on it and it copies it to your clipboard. Definitely take advantage of this. There is no validation tool in this exam. So if you mistype anything, you get the question wrong. So make sure you just copy and paste everything and play it safe. Another place to copy and paste from is the actual documentation, and I'll show you this later in the demo. You can copy from the documentation onto the notepad they give you, and then from the notepad into the Vim editor in the terminal. So avoid typing at all costs. Speaking of the Vim editor, I heard some people set up a vimrc file so that they don't need to type set paste each time. I didn't hear about that until after I took the exam, so I didn't do that. But I'm a fast typer, so it didn't hurt me. Speaking of that, make sure you are careful when you're pasting YAML so that your indentation doesn't get messed up. The way I handled it was every time I went into the editor, I did vim, the file name, and I was inside the editor, I did :set space paste. If you type set paste before you insert and then paste, you won't have the indentation messed up. I also heard that people get fancy with the terminal and do multiplexing. I did not learn how to do that, and I did not try to do that, and I was fine on time. At the top of pretty much every question, they ask you to change the cluster context, and they give you the command for doing that. So you just have to copy paste that into the terminal, but you better make sure you do that. Otherwise, you don't get credit for anything in that question. So watch out for that with every question. Okay, and the top tip is time management, like with any exam. So the exam is 120 minutes long, and I had 16 questions, and I think that number can vary depending on how they mix the difficulty of questions. So that leaves you with about 7.5 minutes per question, and each question has its own weighting. So here's my tip. Once you read the question and you do a quick search in the documentation, if you don't immediately know what to do after knowing what the question is and what your resources in the documentation are, then flag it and move on. So do not get stuck until the very end. Then you can spend as much time as you need to on the ones you got stuck on. So I raced through the entire exam, and then I went back to the ones I got stuck on and spent a little time on each one of those, and I still didn't know them. So I'm really glad I didn't spend more time than that quick amount of time at the beginning. And it turned out in my case, the only questions I got wrong were the ones I actually didn't know and I skipped. The way I know that is I remembered the amount of questions and the approximate weighting that I skipped. and that matched up with the score I got on the exam. For some reason in my exam experience, it didn't tell me a number for how much time was left. That was just slowly filling up as the time progressed towards the 120 minutes. So at one point, just to double check, even though I knew the time I had started, I typed in the chat box for the proctor, how much time do I have left? When the exam was over, the proctor just told me, okay, time's up, please exit the exam. So it didn't just automatically cut me out, but I didn't take advantage of that, obviously, because everything's being recorded, and honesty. And once they told me, please exit the exam, I just clicked exit exam and that was it. Okay, now I want to do a little demo of how you can set up your exam. I actually didn't know this going into the exam, but you can use 2 monitors. This is the only certification exam I've used where you can use 2 monitors. And the way I realized it was the proctor told me when I was signing up, and I was like, oh, can I have a minute to set that up? And I spent like 5 minutes going to the other room, getting another monitor, setting that all up. Fortunately, the proctor had patience for that. And having that extra monitor definitely did help. On the one monitor, I had the documentation open in a browser window, not in full screen mode, because that way I could hover over links and see at the bottom of the Chrome browser a preview of the link I was clicking. Very important, because if you click on a link that's not in a allowed domain, of which there are many links in the Kubernetes documentation, then you disqualify yourself, because then you go to a link that's not allowed. For example, they might have articles to third-party blogs or to Wikipedia even, or to the Kubernetes forum. All of those are not allowed. So do not put your Chrome browser in full screen so that you can see the preview of the URL in the bottom. And then on my primary monitor, I had part of the screen used up by the question and terminal, and then part of it with the notepad that they give you. So I'm going to kind of simulate this for you on a single screen just to make the screen recording easier. Oh, by the way, if you're curious how they did a screen recording of both screens, they had you install a Chrome plugin that had the ability to record 2 windows in your browser at the same time. And that worked pretty smoothly. Okay, so here's a rough simulation of what the exam experience is like. So you have one section with instructions. So each question on the exam has a few subtasks, and then you get to have one window open with the documentation, and then you have a terminal window where you perform the tasks, and you get to have a notepad. The notepad can be opened by going to the top right menu in the exam, and there's like a drop down that includes an option to open up the notes. So I just made up these questions, but a fair amount of the questions are pretty basic like this. Just create a pod, and then they give you like a few variables to include, like the name, the amount of replicas. Actually, I meant to say deployment. And then I'll go and just like search for, okay, they're asking me to do a deployment, so I'm going to search for deployment. If they ask me to do pod, I would search for pod. If they ask me to do like a rolling update, I would go there. And for each one of these, before I click on the search result, you see down in the bottom left, when I hover over the result, it tells me that this is kubernetes.io/docs. So that is allowable. You are allowed to click on that. And blogs are allowed too. So this one is /blog, that's allowed. But what about like, is there anything forum here? Not here, but okay, let's say you actually typed in forum. Okay, you see this is discuss.kubernetes.io, and do not click on that. Do not get disqualified by clicking on that. Okay, but back to our question of deployment. I'm going to just click on the first result, and within this page also make sure you don't click on any links that take you outside of the allowed domains or subdomains. They're just asking me to create a deployment with 5 replicas. Okay, this example includes the property replicas and it includes the property image. I'm just going to use that. I'm going to use this handy copy paste, and I'm just going to copy and paste it into the notepad they give me. And I'm going to just copy and paste the name here. And again, you can copy and paste just by clicking on it. They have that feature in the exam. And I'll replace the name. So this deployment was called Nginx deployment. Oops, the name I did for this example doesn't make sense. So I'm going to copy and paste this name and put it here. Great deploy. And then I'm going to copy and paste the number of replicas and replace that. And I'm going to copy and paste the image name and replace that. By the way, for a lot of these questions, it's not create, but update a deployment. And in that case, they might already have the YAML file in the terminal environment. And then you can just copy and paste it from the Vim editor into the notepad, make your changes, and then paste it back into the Vim editor. So in this case, I'm just going to take this and create a file from it by typing vim and then any file name, it doesn't matter, .yaml. And to make sure the copy pasting works as intended, I will do :set paste, and then and you know that worked because it now says paste, and then copy, paste. And all the indentation worked correctly. And then escape :WQ. So definitely know some of the Vim basics for this exam. And then apply deploy.yaml. And oops, yeah, forgot to do -f. Oops, and I forgot to switch the to the cluster context. All right, I have switched context now, and I can do apply-f deploy.yaml, and it was created. Okay, so a lot of blogs about this exam tell you to learn all these command line commands with kube control. I was not so interested in learning that because I know in real life, most of the time I'm dealing with CI/CD pipelines and version control and YAML, not command line stuff. So I saw some people post that it saves them time to really know all the command lines and then output it into a YAML, the result of that command line argument or that command. But I did not take that approach. I basically used apply-f and the name of a YAML file for pretty much every question, except for like monitoring the CPU or looking at logs or doing a rollback. But for pretty much everything else, I just used apply-f. And that saved me a lot of time memorizing stuff I don't think I'll be using a lot. So moving on to the second question I made up is performing a rolling update of the deployment we just created to a newer release. And I'm gonna look up rolling update. So for everything, I just use the search box. You know, some people say create a whole bunch of bookmarks and then use those bookmarks during the exam. I use different laptops, different environments. Maybe I'm helping out a customer. I'm not gonna say now import all these bookmarks from me and use those. No, I wanna get used to how I can use this anywhere. And that is, you know, how do I learn to search the Kubernetes? Not how do I learn to memorize exactly where in my bookmarks is everything. So yeah, I just search for everything. Okay, performing a rolling updates, I made sure that's in the docs subdomain before I clicked on it. And I don't know if it says it here, but the gist of it is that rolling updates is the default way an update is created when you apply a change to an existing deployment. So I already knew that going in. So I'm actually not using this documentation, but I like to have it up while I'm working on a problem just in case. But anyway, since I know you don't have to specify rolling update, since I know that's the default, I'm just gonna make this change. And since this is really just a one character change, whatever, I'm gonna break my rule of copy pasting everything and just type it in. All right, so now I have that copied onto my clipboard, and I'm gonna do vim deploy update.yaml. I'm gonna create a new file, do :set paste, and then insert, and then paste, and then escape, :wq, and then kapply.f deploy update, and enter. And see, even though I used a new file, didn't create a new deployment, it configured the existing deployment, and that's because it had the same name, so it knew I was updating that deployment. So I could have just gone in and done like kedit deploy and what's it called, great deploy, and gone in and changed the replica of the Nginx image version, but I find that to be more error prone. I like to do everything in the notepad and then just paste it in and hit apply, just using that one command over and over. And then finally do a rollback. Now this is one I mentioned that you don't really use a YAML for. You would use a CI/CD pipeline for it, or you can use the CLI. And since obviously we don't have a CI/CD pipeline in this test environment, we're going to use the command line. And I'm looking for the command here. Okay, rolling back a deployment. And I do this for every question. Like if I don't find it immediately, I'm going to flag the question and move on to the next question. But in this case, I think we can find it right away. So I'm going to plow on with this question. So let's see. Rolling back to a previous version. Okay, so we're going to roll back. Oh, before I do that, let's just make sure, this is looking the way it's supposed to. So I'm going to just describe this deploy. By the way, always use the shortcut, like paw instead of pod, and deploy instead of deployment when typing. And yeah, it looks like it's successfully updated to 0.2. And now I'm gonna roll back. So I'm just copy pasting this into here, changing the name of the deployment, and I'll update the name to our name here. Copy paste that, and it rolled back. And if I describe that, looks like it went back to the image we wanted. All right, and that is an example of how you can use the documentation, the notepad, and the set paste in the terminal, and the copy paste feature in the questions. If you found these tips helpful, please like and subscribe for more content like this. Also, please leave a comment below if you have any questions about the exam experience, or if you have comments about how you prepared for the exam. Until next time, thanks, Cloud people.